The information contained in this episode is for informational purposes only. No material is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
We need a revolution. There's only one solution. I need somebody to show me the love. We need a revolution.
Hello and welcome to Inform Life Radio. You're listening to Inform Life Radio this week on KKNW AM 1150 in the Seattle Greater Puget Sound area. I am your step-in host, your backfill host today, Bob Runnels. Bernadette Pager still on special assignment, and we are bringing Lisa Templeton with me as well to co-host our show today.
Hi, Bob.
Lisa, how are you?
I am just fine. We've got snow here in South King County. So just enjoying the pretty scenery from my window.
Great. Well, good day to stay inside, get on a podcast or listen to a radio show. Yeah. So again, this is Inform Life Radio on March 13th, 2026. And we have a great show coming up with Grace Schara. He's been on our show before, but I want to go through a couple things that's been going on in our state recently before we get into our interview. First of all, we are a nonprofit in Washington State, and as such, we do pay for this radio hour, and we have a great radio engineer, Nathan, and he helps us broadcast onto multiple platforms. Anyway, that service costs, and we can always use a little bit of extra funding from our members. Thank you to those members who already donate. We can always use a little more at informedchoicewa.org. Thank you very much. We are not lawyers or health practitioners, so today you should get don't take our formal advice for any legal or health matters, but we will be talking legal and health matters today. We are looking for a revolution in the state. Right now, Lisa, we've just finished yesterday our legislative session in Olympia, right?
Right. It was sine die yesterday. Took me a while to learn how to pronounce that.
Yeah, I can never pronounce that. Sine die. Okay. And so how many bills, we were tracking how many in our bill tracker page?
Oh, gosh. 30. But I was
30.
tracking more behind the scenes. I didn't want to overwhelm people too much, so I didn't put everything on the watch list.
Right. And I know of one that passed that we were tracking with a kind of a strong opposition.
Yes. Could you be referring to House Bill 2242?
That's the one. It was preserving access to preventative health services in general. That's my summary of the title.
That's what they called it. Yeah.
That's what they called it. Right. So what we would call it is how to divorce ourselves from the federal HHS and take vaccine recommendations from trade groups like the American Association or Academy of Pediatrics, I think it's called, AAP.
Right. Yeah. House Bill 2242 has, I believe Governor Ferguson has signed it, and it codified that DOH, Department of Health, may unilaterally, without a rulemaking process, issue recommendations and related guidance regarding vaccination. They're saying it's based in science, but I think the science TM has come into question because it often seems to be profit motivated. And also, it will require most private insurance plans in Washington to cover the recommended products 100%. And also, the bill changed the definition of vaccine within the Washington Vaccine Association, which is part of the state's universal pediatric vaccine purchase program, to allow it to disregard ACIP recommendations, relying instead solely on DOH's recommendations.
Right. So they said that this was trying to clarify the recommendations being tossed around for vaccination. But to me, this just adds another list. This just adds another source of information that people, parents and families would have to review before they start taking some of these preventative services, it seems more confusing.
Yeah, more confusing. But let's just hope that with all of this confusion, parents will be even more likely to really dig down and do some research before they proceed, and just don't just present their child and say, "Hey, what's up today, doctor? Go ahead and
Yeah.
do whatever is called for on your schedule." So hopefully more people are doing their research. We have the internet now, which is something we didn't have when my kids were born. Well, at least not to this extent. So hopefully parents are in a lot better position, and people like our guest are doing a lot to help educate people that it's absolutely critical that they do their medical due diligence.
Yeah, and don't forget our website, informedchoicewa.org. We do have references, exposés, risk and benefit explanations for all the childhood shots, and quite a few other, call them toxic exposure risks as well.
Right.
in our environment.
And one of the things we offer that I'm so proud of, and that was Bernadette's brilliant idea, is in the state of Washington, statute provides that after a parent takes a so-called risk benefit class regarding their school-age child's so-called required vaccines, that a doctor may simply sign a letter, not even the exemption itself, and the parent attaches that to the exemption and thereby asserts the exemption for daycare and schools. And this is a free service we offer, which is the risk benefit class. And then we also offer the referral to a practitioner who's willing to sign that letter. So this has already saved well over 100 families from having their kids take vaccines that the families don't want them to have, the parents, I should say.
Right, and we have at least a dozen providers. We just have a short list of people we can get you in touch with locally, and they may have an additional process, of course, to make sure that we meet the letter of the law in terms of that risk-benefit presentation.
Yes.
But yeah, we've got some great providers out there. We quietly keep that list.
Right. Yeah. We keep it held in our own little files, but people just go on informedchoicewa.org and search risk benefit referral. You'll see the RCW cited there and have a place to register.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, it's one of our main pull-down options.
Yeah. And
Yeah, that's
Bernadette
good.
teaches that class every Wednesday night.
Mm-hmm. Great. So let's transition off the Washington State news a little more and bring on our guest, Scott Schara. He's been on our radio show quite a few times, at least twice.
Yeah, I really got to know Bernadette over the years. She's been a steady friend. It's been nice to know her, but it's good to meet some new friends too. So I'd like to get to know both of you, Bob and Lisa.
Likewise, Scott. Welcome.
Great, Scott. We've been watching you from a distance, and we occasionally do have a chance to touch base with you, and it's been over a few years now that we've been able to touch base with you. But our audience, to some extent, is aware of Grace's predicament and everything you were doing to get the word out about Grace. Can you again summarize for our audience, though we might have some new listeners, just give us the I'm probably going to cry, but go ahead and give us the rundown of Grace and what happened during the pandemic.
Well, what happened to Grace is ultimately she was killed in a hospital, and we have to go backwards a bit to get into what actually happened. So her last day on Earth was October 13th of 2021. Grace was 19 years old. She had Down syndrome. She was my best buddy, and to give you the mindset first, I mean, when people hear me speak now, they see somebody who has invested 4,000 hours studying the medical industrial establishment. So I really understand this system now and how demonic it is. But back then, I would have been, a typical person, chasing the American dream, trusting the hospital system, trusting the doctor, But yet I owned a business for most of my life, so I had a healthy distrust for the government. But still, I was just a normal person. We had a normal family, and everything was going great. I was nearing retirement from my business. I had turned my business over to my men to run, and we were having the time of our life. So now this thing that we're, for argument's sake, we'll call COVID. I hate even calling it that because it's a complete scam, and it was a design scam by our own government to reduce the population. And so anybody that tells you COVID was a mistake, you should run from that person. It was an absolute success from the perspective of the globalist agenda. So that's what I know now. Well, now we'll go back to that time frame and what happened. And it might be the most important thing that I could ever tell an audience is, how did we fall trapped to it? And we fell trapped to it because of long-term programming. And both of you, I'm sure would be familiar with the term collectivism. And collectivism has created a culture of death in our country. And the specific hook that snagged us was the civic duty hook. So on October 1st of 2021, we were going to go to my wife's cousin's wedding, and Grace had a cold, and we just thought, well, you know what? COVID is going around. We better test her just in case she has COVID. So my wife drove, we would live out in the country. She drove into Walgreens, got a COVID test. We tested Grace, and she tested positive. So then we thought, well, it's our civic duty to not spread COVID. Okay. So the civic duty is complete BS, but it is used to snag people into believing in collectivism, which is we've got to do what's good for the population, not what's good for the individual. So, and I'm not going to get on a whole bunch of rabbit trails, but I mean, the whole virology vaccine agenda has been around since the 1850s, and they've snagged a lot of people with that. So anyway, we started following then the less evil FLCCC protocol, frontline COVID critical care doctors, and unfortunately bought a pulse oximeter, started measuring Grace's oxygen saturation, and their protocol said if that number goes below 94%, admit yourself to the hospital. So we did. Grace's oxygen dropped to 88% on October 6th. Grace was fine. She just had 88% oxygen and a cold, and 7 days later she was dead. And what happened in that hospital was they gave Grace a combination of meds, Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine, that should never be combined. And if they are combined, you are supposed to use some extreme measures to monitor the patient. And when Grace's numbers started tanking after they combined those meds, our daughter Jessica was now in the room with Grace, and she called us panicking. Yeah, we started screaming to the nurses to save our daughter. And that's when we learned the doctor had put an illegal do not resuscitate order on Grace's chart. And how did we learn that? We learned it because the nurses stood outside the room and hollered back, "She's DNR." And we screamed, "She's not DNR, save our daughter." And they refused. They obeyed that illegal order instead of coming in and saving Grace. And we watched her die on that FaceTime call at 7:27 p.m. on October 13th of 2021. Through God's providence, we had the first and likely the only jury trial in America with COVID listed on the death certificate as the cause of death. That was an intense diversion in my overall research, but it was a necessary puzzle piece to write the book that I just released this last week. And that lawsuit, and we lost the lawsuit 11-1 in favor of the defense, which anybody that watched it was shocked. But praise God, I mean, the lawsuit was live streamed. CHD TV live streamed it with the help of the New American having cameras in the courthouse. And, so millions of people saw different pieces of that trial, and it has saved thousands of lives because of the trial being live streamed. So I'm very content with the results because God knew the results before we ever walked in the courtroom. And what my responsibility was to leave it all on the battlefield. And I have, out of all, I've started 4 businesses from scratch. And I have, out of all the things, I have been a hard worker my whole life. And that trial, preparing for the trial, not the trial itself. The trial itself was fun because we were so prepared, but preparing for that trial was the hardest thing I've ever done.
And did you provide most of your own defense?
No, I had 4 full-time attorneys, and then another attorney joined us at the end. So, the trial cost $1.1 million in legal fees.
Oh,
But I mean, it would have cost way more if I didn't do all the legwork.
Right.
You had the disclaimer at the beginning of the show that we don't provide legal advice. Well, I spent $1.1 million. I should have a legal degree at this point because boy, did I learn how that system works, and I know it well. But I studied the records. So, I provided the chronology. I cross-referenced all the depositions with the medical records. And, I provided all that assistance. I was, I ended up being the 5th member of the legal team. And my background is strategic planning. And so once they realized what my skill set was, it was great. They added me to the team essentially versus, normally a client isn't part of the legal team, but I became part of the legal team. And, it was really a unique relationship because I'm also very outspoken. And so, most of the time when you have a trial, the attorneys don't want you out speaking to the public. And I've been on close to 1,300 interviews already. And I just said, this is the deal. I'm going to keep speaking out because I'm not putting my faith in some jury trial. That's for sure. I want to save people's lives.
Yeah. And so even though the decision was against your specific case, you are still, you're claiming success because you were able to make people aware of what risks are out there in the hospital protocols?
Well, not just the risks of the hospital protocols, but to see that the legal system is in bed with the medical system.
Okay.
It's all part of the same Antichrist system. And people got to see that. To give you just an example, Bob, I told you the cost of the legal fees was $1.1 million. The most we could have received because of state statutory limits, and this is in Wisconsin, but this is across the whole country. They convinced us we needed to have tort reform in the 70s. So, we got to stop all these lawsuits. So what they did is they put a cap on medical malpractice lawsuits of $750,000. So, you cannot take a case to jury trial because there's not enough money if you win. And we had signed over so assuming that we won, what happens when you have a big trial like this? It was a 3-week trial. So then you have a pre-trial.
Oh.
So once we had the pre-trial in May, we knew for sure we have a trial. So then my wife and I signed over the proceeds in case we would win. We signed over the proceeds to our nonprofit so that we could never touch it. We just wanted to have the case be above reproach and take it all the way to the jury. And, boy, we really got to expose what is going on behind the curtain, both the medical and the legal.
So what were if you can, I don't know if it's too complex for a radio show or hand waving on our on our video, but what were some of the technical complaints that then got decided against you?
Well, all of them got decided against us. We entered the trial with 5 complaints. One was wrongful death. Then we had medical malpractice, lack of informed consent, medical battery, and a declaratory judgment for the illegal do not resuscitate order. The battery, right before it went to jury, the judge dismissed the battery claim. So then the remaining 4 claims went to the jury. Technically, the declaratory judgment doesn't go to the jury. The judge is supposed to decide that.
Okay.
The defense used a trick after the trial. So the judge ended up signing off on the declaratory judgment without ruling on it. So I filed a motion for new trial in October. And so now that stands on the record. That motion for new trial was denied, but the illegal do not resuscitate order is now part of the record.
I see.
I mean, it's kind of I realize that's a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, it is. It's just horrible that DNR, the do not resuscitate, ended up in the middle of all this. Now, I read some other aspects of the situation? Was there an overprescription of medicine as well, that malpractice part?
Well, yeah, the malpractice part. So our expert, Dr. Gilbert Burdine, he commented extensively on it. But just to lay out the time frame, Grace had Grace's first day in the hospital was October 7th. She was overdosed on Precedex already on October 7th. We had no idea. I was in the hospital room with Grace at that time, and still had no idea she was overdosed. We see it in the medical records. Then she had a second overdose on the 8th. And Dr. Burdine, it was very clear with the medical records that if Grace received above 0.7 milligrams, I think it's micrograms, it might be milligrams or micrograms, I don't remember, per kilogram per hour, it caused a reaction to Grace. Great, the Precedex is one of, every drug has a package insert, and the package insert for Precedex had 12 different side effects that Grace had, but the staff just kept giving her Precedex. And so when you turn the page to October 13th, immediately starting that day at midnight, they increased the Precedex above the dose that was giving her a reaction. And by 8:40 in the morning, they maxed out the Precedex. Then they combined Precedex with lorazepam, 3 doses of lorazepam, and it was enough to knock Grace out. So by 5 o'clock in the evening already, they documented Grace as somnolent, no response. And then it got worse. At 6:09, Grace's blood pressure was reported as undetectable. And at 6:15, they gave her morphine. So those 3 meds, if you look at the morphine package insert, are not supposed to be combined. And Dr. Burdine said giving her morphine at that stage was the single worst decision he has seen clinically in 46 years of medical practice. When he saw Grace's records, he chose to come on the case because he felt he was called. He had only worked for the defense in the past. So he spent hundreds of hours on the case. He didn't take one penny personally because he just wanted this out to, of course, we all thought we were going to win. Even the odds are totally against winning. But we knew, we were well prepared, great expert, the records, everything. But what happens when you're in a jury trial, and this is a shocking piece of it. When you're in a jury trial, not only, if you think about, you've got a jury of your peers. Well, if you two were my peers on the jury, we'd have a different outcome. But the jury is a cross section of the population. And so one of the jury members wore a mask the entire trial. I would guess that 80% of them were triple jabbed, and they believed COVID was real. So, I mean, you're up against programming of a jury. But worse than that, after Dr. Burdine's testimony, we were really feeling great because he thought, man, he knocked it out of the park. But they brought in 5 medical experts, 2 from Johns Hopkins, that said the exact opposite of Dr. Burdine. And they even said that a doctor can unilaterally put a DNR on a patient without the patient's knowledge, authority, signature, anything. Completely against common sense, of course. And so they define the standard of care at a trial, and it's relative. It's not fixed. It's not, when I say we had no knowledge of these meds until after you see the medical records. How is that possible, right? We're supposed to have informed consent. Well, they said that informed consent is not required in an ICU. So that's how they could do it. So, you have 5 people up on a stand telling the same story over and over and over against one person, our expert, saying, no, this is a bunch of crap. And
so I guess in the ICUs, it's all emergency situations, and they get to just do what they think is best in the moment, and they get a hall pass. Is that what you're basically saying?
They get a free pass. Yeah.
Yeah. But
it got bigger than that because they came up with this doctrine of implied consent. And, that was ultimately the overriding doctrine. They said that even if because we never signed a general consent document. So we knew that we never signed our rights over, right? So now then they come up with this implied consent doctrine that the judge bought into and said, just by crossing the threshold of a hospital, you are given implied consent.
Is that true for any hospital, or is there a patient's rights document at that hospital that might dictate that?
this was Ascension Hospital System. If I showed you the patient rights document, you'd say, yeah, well, you had that right. You don't have any dead people don't talk, and you can't sue. We sued because, we got called to do it. I mean, by God's providence, we had the opportunity to do it, and we showed the world this whole system is, we've been programmed. Think about, did you two go to the public fool system like I did?
Yes.
Okay.
Possibly
So
in a time when there was less programming, maybe?
Well, yeah, we think there's less programming, but we all went through the public fool system thinking, the judicial system is the check on Congress, the check on the president, right? It's a bunch of BS. It should be called the injustice system. So we've been programmed to think that's where you get justice. No, it's not where you get justice, because they provide cover for the entire medical industrial complex.
Yeah,
so it's properly called the injustice system. So you think we weren't programmed. All right, I'll take you back to 1968. I went to kindergarten in 1968. So that tells you how old I am. So in 1968, I found the teacher's edition for this weekly reader. Remember the weekly reader?
Yeah.
The weekly reader in 1968 was telling kindergartners, if your parents have more than 2 children, that's irresponsible because we don't have enough resources on the planet. So they're programming in 1968, they're programming us for the population reduction agenda.
Good find. Good find.
I think 68 is when Club of Rome was founded, and WEF and several other nefarious organizations. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All for the greater good.
Yeah, well, that's what they've sold us on. That's why I think the collectivism doctrine that started in 1905 with Jacobson versus Massachusetts, the Supreme Court case, that set in motion all kinds of things that have been subtly programmed into all of us. And so we believe in that greater good thing. So then all of a sudden we believe in rationing care. And rationing care is embedded in Obamacare. Ezekiel Emanuel, who is one of the chief architects of Obamacare, stated that if you are a non-contributing member of society, you don't deserve medical care. So we've got to take care of the people contributing to society, not the people who aren't. Well, guess who aren't contributing? The 135 million Americans on Medicare and Medicaid. And the cost of those Americans on Medicare and Medicaid is $5 trillion annually, over 50% of the federal budget. So they create this budget con. Oh, we've got to balance the budget. These guys don't want to balance the budget. There will never be a balanced budget because we have a fiat currency. They lie to us, telling us we've got to balance the budget. So then why? Well, that way they can say, well, we've got to do some cutting with Medicare and Medicaid. And what does cutting mean? It means rationing care. I mean, they can print money for every conceivable foolishness that they want to do, but they have no desire to take care of the disabled and elderly. And here's a news flash. Everybody listening, if we don't die sooner, is going to be disabled or elderly someday.
Mm-hmm.
Some things are inevitable, but can you explain the rationing to me more again? Maybe there's a couple examples.
So I'll give you a great example during COVID. The disabled population has different organizations that lobby for them. Okay, so then during COVID, what they would do, I could hardly believe it, because they're lobbying for something that would kill them. But this doesn't specifically answer your question, but I'm going to answer your question. So they're lobbying for ventilators, saying, our disabled population should have the same right to ventilators as the non-disabled population, not realizing they're asking to be killed because the ventilators had a 90% kill rate when used with COVID. So they're lobbying for ventilators for their population group, not realizing they're actually lobbying for their early death. So rationing care on a bigger, have you heard of quality adjusted life years before I mentioned it?
I've heard of it, right, and how Japan rates a lot higher than we do.
So what that is so there's been a couple of times this has gone to Congress. It's never gotten to the point of a vote. They reject it ahead of time, where this is the metric that, so they're trying to outlaw it. When people are bringing it up, they're trying to outlaw it. Well, this is the metric that they use to determine if you're going to get care. What is your quality of life compared to somebody that's healthy? So then you don't get the same care as the healthy person. So that's rationing care.
It's making care scarcer for somebody who might not have a great outcome.
Well, because of their quality of life outcome, so a person that I can't think of me.
Well, I'm sorry if I'm not getting this.
No, I'm trying to think of it. We rescued a disabled man out of a hospital, Robert Pazer, and he has a bone and muscle disease. I forgot what it is. But so okay, his quality of life, he's going to be in a wheelchair his whole life. You meet the man, he's a beautiful guy. He's just awesome. Grace's life expectancy is different because she had Down syndrome. Okay, well, and Grace will never pay $100,000 in income tax. Okay, so she's a non-contributing member of society, right? She'll be just that's just the plight of somebody with Down syndrome relative to how our society scores people. We score them as productive or non-productive. Well, that isn't how God scores people. God is an individualist, and so these things they're embedded in our thought process. I'll give you an example about so the idea that we have limited resources on the planet. So that's a gigantic lie. So if there's limited resources on the planet, then we have to do things like ration, and we have to reduce the population. So when we have to ration things, so they get us to participate in these lies by telling us, oh, there's limited resources on the planet, we've got to recycle. Well, recycling has been proven as a scam. So why did they do it? Well, because they get us into the collectivism mindset by participating in these little things. The civic duty. If you two were awake during COVID, and we didn't wear masks during COVID, so our family was just anti-mask. I knew the masks were not real. Okay, so then you get shamed, right? You go into a public place and you're shamed because why don't you wear a mask? Well, right. because I'm educated and you're not. That's why. But the person that's trying to shame you is bought into the collectivism idea. And, this is embedded in our society. Think about just going in the public pool system. How are people recognized in the public pool system? It's based on the herd mentality. We got to get along with the herd. That's how you're recognized. If you're an outlier, you disagree with the herd, you're ostracized. Lisa, you can help me with the word.
Ostracized.
Ostracized, yeah, thank you. So you're ostracized because you won't go along with the herd. Okay, so that's the whole collectivism thing. It's very subtle, but most of society is bought into it.
Well, not knowing much about Obamacare and the basic health process that came with that, I would have assumed that Obamacare was healthcare for all, not worrying about the quality of life adjustment return or whatever you'd said.
Sure. Well, that is the assumption. If you read in my book, I lay out section 1553 of Obamacare. Section 1553 legalized euthanasia. And people have no idea that is in Obamacare, because our propaganda machine in this country is outstanding. In 2012, there was the repeal of the Smith-Mundt Act. So when the Smith-Mundt Act was written in 1948, in 1948, they said that the United States can use propaganda against all other countries, but not its own citizens.
Okay.
So we know they used propaganda. All right. So we have JFK's assassination. So there's propaganda, right? We have 9/11, all the propaganda around 9/11. Okay. That was 2001. All right. So 2012, the Smith-Mundt Act is repealed. and they called it modernized. So now the United States can use propaganda against its own citizens. So they can lie to us, and it's legal. Okay.
Right.
So then when that propaganda machine points the finger at these naughty Canadians for their MAID program, it makes us look good, right? We're the good country. These Canadians are they're the bad country. Well, look up Section 1553 of Obamacare, and you'll see who started the medical assistance in dying program. It's us, same country that started COVID.
Yeah,
They
we
want
did cover
us to
that.
believe it came from China. It did not come from China. Yeah, I'm laughing because I've done so much research into this, but I'm laughing because of how well done the propaganda is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been going on a long time.
So take us to your book then. And so this, I would guess, is a compendium of a lot of what you've learned then over the last 4 years.
It is, yeah. So this is the very first copy of the book right here.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to have it done. It's a miracle. So I wrote the book, of course, because I don't want anybody else to lose their best buddy. But I never thought I'd write a book. What happened is after the trial was over in June, I've been working on a much bigger project called Escaping Babylon. And God put on my heart, write down everything that you've learned about the medical industrial complex. And so I have 4,000 hours of research into that complex since Grace died. So I start writing thinking, well, this is just going to be a extra long Substack. And I'll just break it into pieces. So I wrote it and I sent it to an MD who I trust, because I just wanted the medical things that I put in the book to be technically correct. So she reviewed it and said, Scott, this is a book. And so then, all right, well, now I've got to have a different angle, because I was thinking it's going to be a Substack to the people who are already following us. And so now you have the angle of a book. And so I chose to write the book from the perspective that I took everything that I've learned, put it in this book. Not the book would be this thick if it was. So there's a lot of end notes, because I didn't write a chapter on every single thing that I've learned. I chose certain things and weaved in Grace's story, weaved in the lawsuit, weaved in at the end. The last chapter is about her last day on earth, all the medical records. But then between those bookends with Grace at the beginning, at the end, is a summary of 4,000 hours of research. And the perspective that I took is that I wanted the book to be complete. I wanted it to be a research book so we indexed it so that when you read it, you can say, okay, what page was it that I had that word? But yet it's when somebody reads it, I've had a few comments already. They've been fantastic, and it'll make you laugh, because Grace was a natural comic. So I've got stories about Grace in there. It'll definitely make you cry. It'll make you angry, but it's truthful. It's gentle and truthful. So what my hope is the Lisa and Bobs of the world who get this will read it, and you'll learn a few things, but you'll say, wow, this is all in one place. I can pass this to my dad, my son, somebody who's not awake yet. And I believe the book is written from the perspective that it will bring them along and get them into the fold, and it will save their life. To be blunt, the book proves beyond a shadow of a doubt, I brought all the receipts, that the government has legalized medical murder. It's by design, and medical murder is the #1 cause of death in America. So that's what it proves.
Okay.
So the title is the government legally killing us? Obviously, I knew the answer to that before I wrote the title. But I wanted to prove it. I wanted to prove it in the book. And, so that's what it's about.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I brought it up on screen here for those watching. We've started from ouramazinggrace.net.
Yes.
And
yeah.
that's now your book is released and added to that homepage.
Correct.
And then it goes to
If
an
you just
Amazon offer page.
I'm sorry, Bob, I interrupted you. Say that again.
And so I looked at the book's Amazon page.
Yeah. So if you click on the cover that's on Grace's website there, so that's how you can buy the book. You just go to ouramazinggrace.net, click on the cover, and it gives you Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Goodreads as choices.
Yeah.
Yeah, and amazingly, so we have 4 days running now. It was released on Tuesday, and we are number one in 4 different classes, 4 different categories, I should say, on
Great.
Amazon. It's mind blowing to me, especially with that title. It's a pretty aggressive title.
Yeah, I know it is a very aggressive title. Well, yeah, once again, folks, the book's called "Is the Government Legally Killing Us?" by Scott Schara, or Grace's dad.
Yes.
Well, I like that it doesn't look too thick when you held it up to the camera there. It sounds like
It's
you've
not.
been concise with your writing, perhaps.
Well, I've been a very prolific writer since Grace's death, and God gave me a gift of taking very complex topics and shortening them up so people can understand them. So one of the comments I got from a lady who she texted me today, she said, "Well, this is written so a layman can understand it," and that is I knew I had that gift since college. So it's written from that perspective. It's only 192 pages, and the 192 pages include the index, all of that. It's only when I look at the text, I'll just look at the last page, and in the actual text of the book, it is only 150 pages. So I've read it cover to cover, and I'm not a fast reader. It's a 3.5-4 hour read, so it's a fairly easy read.
Okay, yeah, that's nice for all of our folks with busy lives to be
Yes,
able to digest that amount of information and then have the resources that
correct.
you've already gathered. Now, one thing that's been somewhat disturbing here in our state, maybe you can speak more on that, is standard of care and how that can kind of be, we have it codified in our state to some extent, and that can be weaponized. And I think you ran into that with Grace. Standard
Well,
of care.
I'm gonna
the
share. Yeah, this is the single most important secret I reveal in the book: how they weaponize standard of care. So let's just go through that. This is huge, and I want people to truly understand what's going on. And so this is not really state by state, although we have the illusion that the states have control. The fact is, the federal government has control of standards of care. And the federal government has control of standards of care because in 1980, the HHS secretary and the HHS department was born. And in 1984, the Chevron doctrine gave the HHS, Health and Human Services Department, complete control of the medical industrial establishment. And how they did that is through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So I'm going to connect the dots with an example that I share in the book. This happened in May of 2018. I went in for we had conventional medical insurance at the time. They said, "Hey, once you're 55, go in and get a physical. It's going to be $300." So I went in to get a physical for $300, and the doctor, everything was fine. And he said, "Do you want to do a CT scan of your heart?" And I said, "Well, not particularly." Well, he said, "Normally it's $2,000. We're doing a special for $80." So I said, okay. So I sign up for the CT scan. I get the scan. The next day they called me and said, "You got to come in right away." And this is that day is the day I learned I had heart disease. So they go through all the metrics and all the blah, blah, blah. And you boil it down to, I said, "Well, what's the cause of this?" And they said, "You have high cholesterol." What's the solution? The statin drug. So I didn't roll over, praise God. And I called a doctor friend of my wife and I, who we graduated from high school with, and her name is Sue. I called her and said, "Sue, this is what's happening." And she said, "Well, Scott, that's pretty bad." And she said, "But my husband just had a heart attack 2 months ago. I'm researching this myself. Let me send you the stuff." So she emailed me. I started researching. I spent a lot of time, probably 3 weeks every waking hour, studying heart disease to figure out what's going on. Why do I have this? I read a book by William Davis, a cardiologist, called Undoctored, and it was so shocking what I learned. First of all, high cholesterol is a lie. We need high cholesterol. So any doctor that tells you you have too high a cholesterol, fire them, because it is a lie. And I'm providing medical advice. Sue me. I don't care. Don't sue this organization. Sue me. Try it, because I'm ready, because I can back that up. It's a lie. And statin is also a lie. So I look at, well, what's the deal with the statin? Well, it reduces your cholesterol in half. So then 3 months after you start taking the statin, they redo your blood chemistry. So you go in the doctor's office and he shows you, hey, look at what I did. I reduced your cholesterol. You pat him on the back on your way to a cardiac event 6 months later because the statin causes a cardiac event. Worse than that, though, it causes dementia. And remember, I mentioned Ezekiel Emanuel earlier. He specifically said, remember, he's the chief architect of Obamacare. He said that people who have dementia are non-contributing members of society and don't deserve medical care. All right, so now I'm going to connect the dots all the way. So that's the introduction to the story. So now I went back to the doctor's office, after this research, might have been a month or so later. I showed him what I discovered, and to my surprise, he was decent. He said, Scott, what you have learned is 10 years ahead of what I know. If you want to do any more tests, just call me. I'll sign the order. You don't have to come back in because you studied this. So that was great. So I got my arms around heart disease. I changed. I got on some supplements, changed diet, and I'm still here. They told me I had a 60% chance of death within the first 12 to 24 months, and I'm still here. Okay. So,
Message of fear again.
Right, exactly. So then here's the secret. All right. So his nurse walked me out and she said, Scott, I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear. And I said, what is it? She said, you have to take the statin. I said, what are you talking about? I don't have to do anything. And she said, our Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates are based on the percentage of our patient population that follows the standard of care. And the standard of care for somebody with your level of heart disease is the statin. I said, I'm not on Medicare or Medicaid. She said, you didn't hear me. It's based on our patient population, not the subset of those that are on Medicare and Medicaid. It's based on our entire patient population. And if enough patients like you reject the standard of care, we have to fire you as our patient to keep our reimbursement rates up. And that's the secret of how the federal government has been able to successfully control healthcare for every single American who is on Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, private insurance. So, obviously we stopped our private insurance after learning that. We don't have medical insurance anymore. Because I do not want to be part of that system. That system is captured. And so that's how they hasten death. So I'm going to give you, so I already explained the standard of care for heart disease, the statin. The statin causes dementia. People on dementia go into nursing homes. They're non-contributing members of society and they kill them. Okay. Now, what's the standard of care for cancer? You both know it. It's chemotherapy. Okay. So if you're in their system again, the doctor does a biopsy, you have the appointment. I got some bad news. You have cancer. Well, what can we do, doc? Well, I can get you in for chemo next week. Well, I think I should get a second opinion. Well, the second opinion is from somebody that's in the same system. So they also recommend chemo. Okay. So the person is an unwitting participant because then what they are thinking, well, I guess it's okay as long as my insurance pays for it. So does my insurance pay for it? Well, yeah, of course. You know why? Because they're in on it.
Mm-hmm.
If that person lives 5 years and 1 day, 5 years and 1 day after they start chemo, they are in a minority class of 2.1% that live 5 years and 1 day, because 97.9% of the people in that same class that they started with that are on chemo are already dead. So that's the secret that they don't want you to know about as to how the federal government controls healthcare in America is through standards of care. So they can codify standards of care to their heart's content. They're codifying things to hasten your death. And I'm going to share one other thing to show you how this trap works. So you're familiar with the American Medical Association, I assume, and they have a code of medical ethics. So I have it right in front of me. Section 2.1.1 is the subtitle Informed Consent. So we think, yeah, informed consent, that's a no-brainer. We got to have no informed consent. And I'm going to show you right now, live, informed consent is a trap. So remember how I told you how the disabled the disabled groups were lobbying for ventilators for the disabled,
Okay.
and they're lobbying for something that kills them. Okay, so the people lobbying for informed consent are lobbying for something that kills them. Right? So just hang with me. You'll believe me by the time I'm done. All right. So I'm just going to read right from the document. Informed consent to medical treatment. I'm going to read it a couple times so we got this down. Informed consent to medical treatment is fundamental in both ethics and law. Patients have the right to receive information and ask questions about recommended treatments so that they can make well-considered decisions about care. Does that sound good?
So far.
So far. Okay. So now let's just break it down. Informed consent to medical treatment is fundamental in both ethics and law. No problem. Patients have the right to receive information and ask questions. No problem. Here's the hook. About recommended treatments. If the doctor accepts Medicare or Medicaid, they only can make recommended treatments based on what CMS decides is the standard of care. So if you get cancer and demand informed consent, they only can give you informed consent about surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. That's it. If they give you informed consent about anything outside of that, they lose their license.
Yes.
So they can't give you true informed consent. That's the hook. About recommended treatments. So we're lobbying for informed consent under the AMA Code of Ethics. We're lobbying for our own death.
And that narrower set of treatments.
That's exactly right. I want informed consent, you bet, but I want informed consent on the whole spectrum of opportunities, not just on this little box that they're allowed to color inside. I think about Grace when that metaphor I just gave you. Grace was a phenomenal colorer. So you'd give her this picture to color, and she would just nail it. But then she would always add her frills outside the lines. And I want doctors, and you should too, doctors that color outside the lines. So what we've done on Grace's website is we have a resource on the resource tab. There are a list of medical professionals that do not accept Medicare or Medicaid. So they're cash pay. And the single most important thing I could tell anybody relative to a direct recommendation for medical care is get a relationship with a medical provider who is outside the system, a cash pay provider, because then they can give you objective information. They're not going to lose their license because they don't accept Medicare or Medicaid.
All right. So that is part of the solution right there. We were going to ask you what are these solutions out of this? Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to point out that is it ouramazinggrace.net?
Yes.
There are a plethora of resources from hospital forms that you should have at the ready, and just a whole bunch. We showed a little bit of the page, but I'm pretty sure you could spend hours on there.
Yeah, it's become a depository because you start in this, and so at the beginning we didn't have a website, we didn't have anything, but all of a sudden, okay, where are we going to put all this research and these resources? So that's why we started the website.
Yeah, well, people do get into emergency situations, and hospitals can almost be inevitable. Any advice for those people?
That if you get in an emergency situation, you have to have an advocate. That's the single most important thing you could have. And the advocate has to be awake. The advocate will protect your life. The advocate has to. So if I could advocate for Grace again, with what I know now, she'd be alive today. And the reason is I would be in the leadership role. I would make sure that I'm here, the doctor's below me. I'm not going to be subservient to the medical profession. And that's the attitude of the advocate. Thank
you, Scott. That's a great conclusion. A good dovetail with our show next week. We'll have William Supple as our guest. He's the author of Cancer is a Parasite. So again, Scott Schara, thank you very much. Lisa, great to have you on. And we will talk to you next week on Inform Life Radio. Take the end of it.
Thank you, Scott, Rob.
Informed Choice Washington is a nonprofit organization that advocates for healthy immunity, medical freedom, and fully informed medical consent. The right to make medical choices without coercion is fundamental to our civil liberties and a basic principle in all human rights declarations. To learn more, tune in each Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. to An Informed Life Radio and visit the website informedchoicewa.org. It's time to take a stand for medical freedom. Go to informedchoicewa.org today.
Did you know that solutions containing iodine can inactivate viruses in the nose and throat in 15 seconds? And hydrogen peroxide can do it in under 30 seconds. Decades of studies, including many conducted during COVID, have shown that properly prepared and used nasal spray and gargling solutions can reduce your risk of infection, reduce viral load, reduce symptoms, and reduce transmission of viruses. To learn more, go to healthyimmunitynow.org and check out the EFU Challenge. Why spread fear and infection when nature provides solutions? Go to healthyimmunitynow.org today.
The information contained in this episode is for informational purposes only. No material is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.